Welcome to this exploration of human psychology. Step by step, we'll journey through the fundamental patterns that shape how we think, feel, and behave. Let's begin with something we use every moment of our lives, yet rarely stop to examine: our attention. Chapter 1. Attention and Focus Psychology. The selective nature of attention. Attention is often described as a spotlight. Imagine standing in a darkened theater, holding a flashlight. Whatever you shine that light upon becomes vivid and clear, while everything else fades into shadow. This is remarkably similar to how our minds work. At any given moment, billions of sensory inputs compete for our awareness. The feeling of clothes against skin, distant sounds, passing thoughts. Yet we can only consciously process a small fraction. Research suggests we can hold approximately 4 distinct items in our conscious awareness simultaneously. This limitation isn't a flaw. It's a feature refined over millions of years of evolution. Our ancestors, who could focus intensely on a rustling in the grass, potentially a predator, survived longer than those whose attention scattered aimlessly. Consider this simple example. You're reading a book in a coffee shop. Background chatter surrounds you, music plays overhead. The espresso machine hisses periodically. Yet, you barely notice these sounds until something changes. Someone calls your name. A glass breaks. Suddenly, your attention shifts completely. This phenomenon, called the cocktail party effect, reveals how our attention operates in layers. Focused attention on your book, peripheral monitoring of the environment, ready to redirect when something significant emerges. Bottom-up versus top-down attention. Psychologists distinguish between 2 forms of attention. Bottom-up attention is automatic and stimulus-driven, like when a bright flash captures your gaze involuntarily. Top-down attention is voluntary and goal-directed, like when you deliberately search for your friend in a crowded room. Throughout our days, these 2 systems constantly interact. You're driving home, lost in thought about tomorrow's meeting, top-down. When a red light appears, bottom-up capture, and you brake automatically. Understanding this interplay helps us recognize why focus sometimes feels effortless and other times requires tremendous effort. Now that we understand attention's basic architecture, let's explore what happens when we try to divide it. A challenge our modern world presents constantly. Multitasking and attention limits. Despite popular belief, humans don't truly multitask. What we call multitasking is actually rapid task switching. Our attention bouncing between activities so quickly, it creates an illusion of simultaneity. Each switch carries a cognitive cost, a brief moment of reorientation that accumulates throughout the day. Imagine a young professional named Sarah. She's writing an important email while monitoring a video conference, occasionally glancing at incoming text messages. She feels productive, handling multiple responsibilities simultaneously. Yet research shows she's likely taking 40% longer to complete these tasks than if she'd done them sequentially, and the quality of each suffers. More concerning, she's training her brain to expect constant stimulation, making sustained focus increasingly difficult. Attention residue. When we switch tasks, fragments of the previous task linger in our minds, a phenomenon called attention residue. If you're working on a report and pause to check social media, part of your attention remains entangled with those notifications even after returning to the report. The mind doesn't instantly clear like an erased whiteboard. Traces remain, competing for mental resources. This explains why deep work, extended periods of focused attention on cognitively demanding tasks, feels increasingly rare. Each interruption, however brief, extends the time required to return to peak concentration. Studies suggest it can take 15–25 minutes to regain full focus after a significant interruption. Examples of attention management. Consider two different approaches. Marcus, a software developer, works in 90-minute focused blocks with his phone in another room and email closed. He tackles his most challenging coding problems during these periods. His colleague Elena keeps all communication channels open, responding quickly to every ping. While Elena feels busy and responsive, Marcus typically accomplishes more meaningful work in less time and reports feeling less mentally exhausted. Neither approach is universally correct. Contexts differ, but understanding attention's limitations helps us make conscious choices rather than defaulting to fragmented attention. Having explored attention's constraints, let's turn to practical strategies for working with our natural attentional rhythms rather than against them. Cultivating sustained focus. Like physical endurance, attentional capacity can be strengthened. Neuroscience reveals that focused practice creates physical changes in the brain, enhanced connectivity in regions associated with executive control, increased gray matter density in areas governing attention regulation. The process resembles building physical strength. If you've spent years in a state of constant distraction, your first attempts at sustained focus might last only a few minutes before restlessness emerges. This isn't failure, it's a baseline. With consistent practice, these intervals extend naturally. Environmental design for focus. Our surroundings profoundly influence our attentional capacity. Consider two workspaces, one cluttered with papers, multiple monitors displaying different information, notifications enabled on several devices. Another features a clear desk, single task-relevant materials, phone in Do Not Disturb mode. The second environment reduces the cognitive load required to maintain focus, fewer stimuli competing for that limited spotlight of attention. A teacher named James struggled with lesson planning, which required deep thinking. He noticed he could barely sustain 10 minutes before checking his phone. Instead of berating himself, he created a simple protocol. During planning sessions, his phone went into a drawer in another room. The first few sessions felt uncomfortable, almost anxious. Within 2 weeks, he was regularly achieving 45-minute stretches of focused work, and the quality of his lesson plans noticeably improved. Attention restoration. Our attentional resources deplete through use, particularly the effortful, directed attention required for complex tasks. Restoration occurs through different modes of engagement. Soft fascination, like watching clouds drift, walking in nature, or listening to rainfall, allows directed attention to rest while maintaining a gentle awareness. This isn't wasted time, it's essential recovery. Research on attention restoration theory shows that natural environments particularly support this recovery. Even brief exposures, looking at trees through a window during a work break, measurably improve subsequent focus. The modern tendency to fill every spare moment with stimulation, scrolling during lunch, podcasts during walks, may prevent this essential restoration. Closing thoughts on attention. Understanding attention isn't about achieving perfect focus at all times, an unrealistic and potentially counterproductive goal. It's about recognizing how this fundamental capacity works, respecting its limitations, and creating conditions that support, rather than undermine, our natural ability to engage deeply with what matters. As we move forward, we'll explore how attention interacts with habit formation, how the patterns we repeat shape where our attention naturally flows. Chapter 2. Habit Formation. Introduction to Automatic Behavior. Welcome to our exploration of habit formation. If attention is where we consciously direct our mental spotlight, habits are the vast infrastructure of automatic behaviors running constantly in the background. Researchers estimate that 40 to 50% of our daily actions are habitual, performed with minimal conscious thought. This automation isn't laziness, it's profound efficiency. Imagine if you had to consciously think through every step of tying your shoes, brushing your teeth, or driving your usual route home. You'd be mentally exhausted within hours. Habits free cognitive resources for novel challenges and complex decisions. The habit loop. At the core of every habit lies a simple neurological pattern called the habit loop, consisting of three elements: cue, routine, and reward. The cue is a trigger that initiates the behavior: a time of day, an emotional state, a location, the presence of certain people, or a preceding action. The routine is the behavior itself, which can be physical, mental, or emotional. The reward is the positive reinforcement that makes your brain remember this pattern for future use. Consider a simple example. Every afternoon at 3 p.m., cue, you walk to the break room for coffee, routine, which provides a pleasant caffeine boost and a brief social interaction with colleagues, reward. After enough repetitions, this loop becomes so ingrained that 3 p.m. itself triggers a mild craving, and your feet almost carry you to the break room automatically. Why habits form? From an evolutionary perspective, habit formation solved a critical problem: how to preserve mental energy while still responding effectively to recurring situations. Our ancestors who developed efficient routines for finding water, preparing food, or scanning for danger could dedicate their limited conscious attention to novel threats and opportunities. The basal ganglia, a primitive structure deep in the brain, plays a central role in habit formation. As behaviors repeat in consistent contexts, neural patterns shift from the prefrontal cortex, associated with conscious decision-making, to the basal ganglia, where they become automated. This transition explains why new behaviors feel effortful and require conscious attention, while established habits unfold almost unconsciously. Understanding this basic architecture helps us see why changing habits presents such unique challenges. Let's explore what happens when we try to break established patterns or build new ones. Building and breaking habits. Many people approach habit change with pure willpower, attempting to simply stop unwanted behaviors or force themselves to adopt new ones. This approach often fails, not due to lack of character, but because it misunderstands how habits function. You cannot simply delete a habit loop, you must reprogram it. The most effective strategy involves keeping the cue and reward stable while changing the routine. Consider someone who habitually snacks on chips every evening while watching television. Cue, sitting on couch at 8 p.m., routine, eating chips, reward, satisfying craving for crunch and salt, plus the comfort of the ritual. Attempts to simply not eat chips through willpower alone create tension without addressing the underlying loop. A more effective approach identifies the true reward. Is it the physical craving for salt, the sensory pleasure of crunching, the ritualistic comfort? Through experimentation, this person might discover that carrots with hummus provide similar satisfaction. The routine changes, but the cue and reward remain, making the new pattern more sustainable. Implementation intentions. Research by psychologist Peter Gollwitzer reveals that specific if-then plans significantly increase habit formation success. Rather than vague goals like, "I'll exercise more," implementation intentions specify exactly when and where. If it's Monday, Wednesday, or Friday at 6:30 a.m., then I will put on my running shoes and run for 20 minutes. This specificity works because it creates clear cues. The time and day themselves become the trigger, and reduces the need for in-the-moment decision-making. You're not weighing whether to exercise each morning. You're simply executing a predetermined plan when conditions match. Small changes and identity. A common mistake is attempting multiple major habit changes simultaneously. This overwhelms our limited self-regulatory capacity. More effective is starting with keystone habits, small changes that cascade into other positive behaviors. Take Maria, who decided to make her bed every morning. This seemingly minor habit created a ripple effect. The tidy bed made her bedroom feel more organized, which motivated her to keep other surfaces clear, which made her feel more in control, which positively influenced her mood and decision-making throughout the day. One small habit anchored broader changes. James Clear's research on identity-based habits offers another insight. Sustainable change often comes not from focusing on outcomes, losing 20 pounds, but on identity, becoming someone who values health. Each small action becomes a vote for the type of person you wish to become. While individual habit change is valuable, understanding the broader environment in which our habits exist helps us create systems that support rather than undermine our intentions. Context, environment, and habit systems. Our environments shape our behaviors far more than we typically recognize. Consider your kitchen. If cookies sit on the counter in clear view, you'll eat more of them. Not because you lack discipline, but because visual cues powerfully trigger habit loops. The inverse is equally true. Making healthy foods visible and convenient, cut vegetables at eye level in the refrigerator, increases consumption without requiring additional willpower. This principle extends beyond food. A designer named Alex wanted to read more, but found herself defaulting to social media each evening. Instead of relying on willpower, she restructured her environment. Phone charger moved to a drawer in another room, a book placed on the coffee table where her phone used to sit. The physical environment now supported her desired habit, rather than competing with it. Context-dependent habits. Habits are often bound to specific contexts. You might have a focused work identity at the office, but struggle to maintain the same behaviors at home. This context dependency explains why major life transitions, moving to a new city, starting a new job, can be powerful opportunities for habit change. The old cues are absent, and new patterns can be established before automation sets in. A study of people who successfully maintained exercise habits after relocating found they consciously established new routines early, rather than waiting to settle in first. The disruption of context provided a window for intentional pattern building. Habit stacking. Building new habits becomes easier when we attach them to existing, stable routines. This technique, called habit stacking, uses established behaviors as cues for new ones. For example, after I pour my morning coffee, existing habit, I will meditate for 2 minutes, new habit. The existing habit's automaticity serves as a reliable trigger, and the small duration makes execution likely. Over time, the connection strengthens until meditation feels like a natural part of the morning coffee ritual. The role of tracking. Making progress visible supports habit maintenance. This doesn't require complex systems. A simple calendar with an X marked for each day you complete. The behavior creates visual momentum. The chain of X's becomes meaningful. You don't want to break it. However, tracking can backfire if it becomes punitive. If you miss a day and respond with self-criticism, you're more likely to abandon the habit entirely. A more resilient approach acknowledges that missing occasionally is normal. What matters is returning to the pattern quickly rather than perfection. Closing thoughts on habits. Habit formation isn't about transforming yourself overnight through sheer force of will. It's about understanding the psychological and neurological mechanisms that govern automatic behavior. then working with these mechanisms rather than against them. Small, consistent changes compound over time into substantial transformations, not through dramatic effort, but through patient, intelligent design of behaviors and environments. As we transition to our next topic, we'll explore what energizes these behaviors, the fascinating distinction between motivation and willpower. Chapter 3: Motivation versus Willpower. The nature of motivation. Motivation is the energy that initiates and sustains behavior toward a goal. Unlike the automatic quality of habits, motivation involves a conscious sense of wanting, a pull toward certain outcomes and away from others. Psychologists distinguish between two fundamental types: intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation arises from internal satisfaction. You engage in an activity because it's inherently enjoyable, interesting, or meaningful. Extrinsic motivation comes from external rewards or consequences. You do something to earn money, gain approval, or avoid punishment. Consider two students studying for an exam. One finds the subject genuinely fascinating, enjoys the intellectual challenge, and feels excited to learn more. The other finds the material boring, but studies to maintain a scholarship. Both might spend equal hours studying, but the quality of engagement differs dramatically. The intrinsically motivated student experiences less mental fatigue, retains information more effectively, and feels energized rather than depleted. The motivation equation. Contemporary research suggests motivation emerges from several factors working in concert. Expectancy, your belief that effort will lead to success, forms one component. If you're attempting something you believe is impossible, motivation naturally wanes. Value, how much you care about the outcome, provides another element. Even if success seems probable, motivation remains low if you don't value the goal. Time plays a third role. Immediate rewards motivate more powerfully than distant ones. A quirk of human psychology that made sense in our evolutionary past, but complicates long-term planning. This temporal discounting explains why we postpone important tasks with delayed benefits, exercise, saving money, while prioritizing immediate gratification. Dopamine and the anticipation of reward. Neuroscientist Kent Berridge's research revealed something surprising. Dopamine, long thought to be the pleasure chemical, actually relates more to wanting than liking. Dopamine surges in anticipation of reward, creating the motivational drive to pursue goals. The actual experience of reward involves different neural systems. This distinction helps explain certain puzzling behaviors. You might feel intensely motivated to acquire something, a new gadget, a particular job, only to experience mild disappointment once you possess it. The anticipation activated your dopamine system powerfully. The possession itself generates less neural excitement. Understanding this helps us design sustainable motivation. Rather than depending solely on achieving major goals for satisfaction, finding ways to appreciate progress and maintain engagement with the journey itself creates more consistent motivational energy. While motivation provides the spark, willpower acts as the force we apply when motivation alone proves insufficient. Let's explore this complementary but distinctly different psychological resource. The reality of willpower. Willpower, or self-control, is the capacity to override impulses, delay gratification, and persist through discomfort toward goals. Unlike motivation, which can feel energizing, willpower typically requires effort and creates a sense of depletion. Roy Baumeister's influential research introduced the concept of ego depletion. Exerting self-control in one domain temporarily reduces capacity in others. In classic experiments, participants who resisted eating cookies performed worse on subsequent unrelated self-control tasks, than those who hadn't needed to resist temptation. This suggested willpower functions like a muscle, capable of strengthening over time, but subject to fatigue in the short term. Recent research has added nuance to this model, suggesting beliefs about willpower matter significantly. People who view willpower as unlimited show less ego depletion than those who see it as a finite resource. Still, most of us have experienced the phenomenon. After a day of difficult decisions and impulse management, our self-control in the evening feels notably weaker. The depletion cycle. Consider a typical day for someone trying to change multiple behaviors simultaneously. Resisting donuts at the morning meeting, staying focused through boring tasks, maintaining patience with frustrating colleagues, skipping the usual after-work drink, then attempting to exercise and prepare a healthy dinner. Each decision and resistance depletes the self-regulatory reserve slightly. By evening, when motivation is lowest and temptations often greatest, willpower has already been substantially spent. This explains why so many well-intentioned plans collapse in the evening. It's not moral failure, it's predictable resource depletion. Recognizing this pattern enables better planning, tackling the most challenging tasks when willpower is fresh, reducing unnecessary decisions, creating environmental support that reduces reliance on raw self-control. Physical state and self-control. Early research suggested blood glucose levels directly influenced willpower, with self-control improving after consuming sugar. This finding proved more complex than initially thought. Beliefs and psychological factors play larger roles than once assumed. However, physical state clearly affects self-regulatory capacity. Sleep deprivation, hunger, stress, and fatigue all reduce self-control. This interconnection means sustainable behavior change requires attention to basic physical needs. Someone trying to establish better habits while chronically sleep-deprived and stressed faces a much steeper challenge than someone well-rested and reasonably balanced. Willpower training. Some research suggests regularly practicing self-control in small ways, using your non-dominant hand for routine tasks, maintaining good posture, monitoring speech patterns, can strengthen overall self-regulatory capacity. The key appears to be consistent practice without overwhelming the system. Think of it like physical training. Progressive challenge with adequate recovery builds strength, while constant maximum effort leads to breakdown. Brief, regular exercises in self-control might build capacity over months, whereas attempting extreme self-restraint across multiple domains simultaneously often leads to collapse and abandonment of goals. Understanding both motivation and willpower reveals that relying exclusively on either creates fragility. Let's explore how to build systems that honor the limitations of both while maximizing their strengths. Designing sustainable systems. The most sustainable approaches to behavior change minimize rather than maximize reliance on willpower. This isn't laziness, it's strategic. Every decision requiring self-control consumes limited resources. Automating positive behaviors and eliminating decisions preserves willpower for situations where it's truly needed. Barack Obama famously wore only gray or blue suits, eliminating daily clothing decisions to preserve mental energy for consequential choices. While most of us don't face presidential-level decisions, the principle scales. Reducing trivial decisions frees resources for important ones. A teacher named Rachel struggled with healthy eating. Instead of relying on willpower at each meal, she established a simple system: Sunday afternoon meal preparation for the week. This single bout of effort, while willpower was fresh, eliminated 5 days of decision-making and temptation management. The initial time investment felt significant, but it dramatically reduced the cumulative willpower required throughout the week. Cultivating intrinsic motivation. While extrinsic motivators can jumpstart behavior, sustainable engagement typically requires connecting activities to intrinsic values. Self-determination. Theory identifies three psychological needs that, when met, foster intrinsic motivation: autonomy, feeling in control; competence, experiencing growth and mastery; and relatedness, meaningful connection with others. Consider exercise. Approached as pure obligation, external pressure, it often feels like a chore requiring constant willpower. But someone who chooses activities they genuinely enjoy, autonomy, experiences visible progress, competence, and perhaps exercises with friends or joins a community, relatedness, develops intrinsic motivation that sustains behavior even when willpower is low. This suggests asking, how can I make this goal-directed behavior more intrinsically satisfying? Rather than, how can I force myself to do this? Implementation intentions and temptation bundling. We discussed implementation intentions in habit formation, but they're equally valuable for motivation. Specifying exactly when, where, and how you'll act bridges the gap between intention and behavior, reducing the role of in-the-moment motivation. Temptation bundling, a concept from behavioral economist Catherine Milkman, pairs activities you should do but tend to avoid with activities you enjoy but perhaps overindulge in. For example, only watching favorite shows while exercising, or only getting fancy coffee while working on a challenging project. This approach leverages intrinsic motivation for one activity to support engagement with another. The role of meaning and purpose. Perhaps the most powerful motivational force is a sense of meaning, the feeling that your actions connect to something larger than immediate comfort. Viktor Frankl's work demonstrated that humans can endure tremendous hardship if they perceive it as meaningful. This doesn't require grand purposes. A caregiver exhausted by daily demands might reconnect with the meaningful choice to support a loved one. A student struggling through difficult material might reflect on how this knowledge serves future aspirations. When motivation wanes and willpower depletes, meaning provides a deeper reservoir of energy. A therapist named David, working with individuals struggling with addiction, noticed that willpower-focused approaches showed limited success. More effective were approaches that helped people clarify values and connect daily choices to meaningful life directions. When someone saw staying sober not just as resisting temptation, but as honoring their role as a parent or pursuing a valued career, the psychological landscape shifted. The challenge didn't disappear, but it became situated within a framework that sustained effort. Closing thoughts on motivation and willpower. Neither motivation nor willpower alone provides a complete answer to sustaining positive behavior. Motivation energizes but fluctuates. Willpower enables self-control but depletes. The wisest approach honors both, building systems that cultivate intrinsic motivation while reducing unnecessary demands on limited self-regulatory resources. This isn't about perfect execution, but about creating conditions where positive behaviors become progressively more natural and less effortful over time. Next, we'll explore cognitive biases, the systematic patterns in thinking that shape our perceptions and decisions, often without our awareness. Chapter 4. Cognitive Biases. Introduction to Mental Shortcuts. Our minds process enormous amounts of information constantly. To manage this complexity efficiently, the brain evolved mental shortcuts called heuristics, simple rules that usually work well, but sometimes lead to systematic errors called cognitive biases. These aren't flaws in the sense of manufacturing defects. They're trade-offs. Perfectly rational analysis of every situation would require impossible amounts of time and energy. Heuristics allow rapid decision-making that's often good enough, even if occasionally flawed. Understanding cognitive biases doesn't eliminate them. They're deeply embedded in how cognition works. But awareness helps us recognize when we might be vulnerable to distorted thinking. Confirmation bias. Perhaps the most pervasive bias is confirmation bias, our tendency to seek, interpret, and remember information that confirms existing beliefs while dismissing contradictory evidence. This creates self-reinforcing cycles where beliefs become progressively more entrenched regardless of objective evidence. Imagine two people encountering the same news article about climate change. One believes climate change is a serious threat, the other is skeptical. Research shows both will likely find the same article reinforcing their pre-existing view. The believer notices data supporting concern. The skeptic focuses on uncertainties or qualifications. Neither is consciously distorting information. Confirmation bias operates largely below awareness. This bias affects domains from politics to personal relationships. If you believe a colleague dislikes you, you'll naturally notice moments of coldness while overlooking friendly gestures. The belief becomes self-confirming, not because it's necessarily accurate, but because attention selectively filters experience. Availability heuristic. We judge the likelihood of events based on how easily examples come to mind. Vivid, recent, or emotionally charged events feel more common than they actually are, while difficult-to-recall events feel rare. After seeing news coverage of airplane crashes, many people feel more anxious about flying, even though, statistically, driving remains far more dangerous. The dramatic, widely publicized airplane crash is cognitively available. The thousands of uneventful flights and routine car accidents receive less attention and feel less salient. This heuristic made evolutionary sense. If dangerous events were easily remembered, our ancestors stayed appropriately cautious. But modern media environments create distorted availability. Sensational events receive disproportionate coverage, skewing our perception of actual risks and probabilities. Anchoring effect. The first piece of information encountered in a situation serves as an anchor, disproportionately influencing subsequent judgments. Even when we know an anchor is arbitrary or irrelevant, it still affects our thinking. In classic experiments, participants shown a random number before estimating various quantities, like the percentage of African nations in the UN, gave estimates influenced by the random number. Real estate agents shown the same house with different listing prices give different value assessments, even though they claim to base evaluations on objective property characteristics. This bias operates in salary negotiations, purchases, and countless daily judgments. Whoever establishes the initial anchor, whether the opening offer in negotiation or the first option presented, shapes the subsequent discussion, often without anyone consciously noticing. These represent just a few of the many cognitive biases researchers have identified. Let's explore some additional biases that particularly affect how we think about ourselves and our experiences. Biases about ourselves. When explaining behavior, we tend to attribute others' actions to internal characteristics. She's irresponsible, while attributing our own actions to external circumstances. I was overwhelmed. This asymmetry, the fundamental attribution error, creates systematic misunderstandings in social interactions. If someone cuts you off in traffic, you might think, "What a reckless driver." Internal attribution. If you cut someone off, you think, "The exit came up suddenly, and I didn't want to miss it." Situational attribution. Both explanations might be accurate in their specific instances, but the pattern reveals bias. We grant ourselves contextual understanding. We don't automatically extend to others. This bias intensifies conflict. In workplace disagreements, one person sees their colleague as stubborn and unreasonable, internal traits, while seeing themselves as responding appropriately to difficult circumstances, situational factors. The colleague likely holds the mirror image view. Unless both recognize this perceptual asymmetry, resolution becomes difficult. Dunning-Kruger effect. Psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger discovered a paradox. People with limited knowledge or skill in a domain often overestimate their competence, while experts frequently underestimate theirs. This occurs because recognizing one's own limitations requires the very expertise one lacks. A novice chess player might feel confident they understand the game well after learning basic rules and strategies. An expert, aware of the game's enormous depth and complexity, recognizes how much they still don't know. The novice's confidence isn't arrogance. They genuinely cannot perceive the sophisticated patterns beyond their current understanding. This has practical implications. It suggests that growing expertise involves a humbling phase. Initial confidence gives way to recognition of complexity, before eventually reaching genuine competence accompanied by appropriate self-assessment. It also suggests we should be especially cautious about strong certainty in areas where we have limited experience. Hindsight bias. After an event occurs, we tend to believe we knew it all along. Hindsight bias. Outcomes that seem inevitable in retrospect felt far more uncertain before the event. This distorts our evaluation of decisions and our ability to learn from experience. Consider financial markets. After a market crash, the warning signs seem obvious. Of course, the bubble would burst. Anyone could see it was unsustainable. But before the crash, predictions varied wildly, and many intelligent observers saw continued growth. Hindsight bias creates a false sense that the outcome was predictable, which can lead to overconfidence in future predictions. This bias affects how we judge ourselves and others. A decision that seemed reasonable given available information at the time might appear obviously flawed after we know the outcome. This makes fair evaluation difficult. We need to reconstruct what was known and unknown at the decision point, rather than judge from the vantage of complete information. Self-serving bias. We tend to attribute successes to internal factors. I succeeded because I'm talented and worked hard. And failures to external factors. I failed because of bad luck or circumstances beyond my control. This self-serving bias protects self-esteem but can impede learning. After receiving a promotion, someone might think, my skills and dedication were recognized. After being passed over, the same person might think office politics or favoritism determined the outcome. Both explanations might contain truth, but the pattern, claiming credit for successes, externalizing failures, suggests bias rather than objective analysis. The challenge is finding balance. Some self-serving bias might be psychologically healthy, protecting against excessive self-criticism. But excessive self-serving bias prevents learning from failures and can create tensions in relationships when others perceive the pattern. Understanding these biases about ourselves helps explain common interpersonal misunderstandings and barriers to accurate self-assessment. Let's now examine biases that specifically affect social perception and group dynamics. Social and group biases. Humans readily form groups based on anything from nationality to favorite sports teams, and quickly develop in-group bias, favoring members of our own groups while viewing out-group members less favorably. This occurs even with arbitrary or trivial groupings. In minimal group paradigm experiments, researchers assign participants to groups based on obviously meaningless criteria, like a coin flip, yet participants still show preferential treatment toward in-group members. This reveals how fundamental the tendency is. We don't need deep shared identity or history. Simple categorization triggers bias. In everyday life, In-group bias manifests in subtle ways. We interpret ambiguous behavior more charitably when it comes from someone perceived as similar to us. We feel more empathy for in-group members suffering. We remember positive in-group behaviors and negative out-group behaviors more readily than the reverse. Understanding this bias doesn't eliminate it, but awareness helps. When you notice yourself quickly judging someone negatively, asking, "Would I interpret this behavior differently if it came from someone I identify with?" can reveal the bias operating. The halo effect. A single positive quality, especially physical attractiveness, creates a halo that influences judgments about unrelated characteristics. Attractive people are often unconsciously perceived as more intelligent, competent, and trustworthy, despite these traits having no logical connection to appearance. This extends beyond appearance. Someone who speaks confidently might be assumed to have more expertise than they actually possess. A well-designed product might be assumed to function better than a similar product with less appealing aesthetics. The halo effect explains why first impressions carry such weight. Early positive or negative perceptions color subsequent information, creating momentum that's difficult to reverse. Someone who makes a strong initial impression gets the benefit of doubt on ambiguous later behaviors. Someone whose first impression was poor faces an uphill battle for neutral assessment. Groupthink. In cohesive groups with strong leadership and isolation from outside perspectives, a phenomenon called groupthink can emerge. The desire for harmony and consensus overrides realistic evaluation of alternatives. Critical thinking diminishes, dissenting views are suppressed, and collective decisions can become dramatically flawed. Irving Janis identified several historical examples, including the Bay of Pigs invasion, where intelligent, experienced decision-makers collectively pursued an obviously flawed plan. Group cohesion and pressure for unanimity created conditions where doubts went unspoken and critical analysis was abandoned. Groupthink thrives in certain conditions: high stress, dominant leadership, isolation from outside input, and lack of systematic decision-making procedures. Awareness helps groups build safeguards, designating someone as devil's advocate, explicitly encouraging dissenting views, seeking outside perspectives, and creating anonymous channels for expressing doubts. Sunk cost fallacy. We tend to continue investing in something because of past investments, even when continuing no longer makes sense. The money, time, or effort already spent feels too significant to abandon, even when future costs will exceed future benefits. Someone might stay in an unfulfilling career because they've already invested years in that field. A business might continue funding a failing project because substantial resources have already been committed. Rationally, past investments are gone regardless. Decisions should be based on future costs and benefits, but psychologically, we struggle to write off sunk costs. Closing thoughts on cognitive biases. Cognitive biases are not character flaws or signs of irrationality. They're natural features of how our minds efficiently navigate a complex world. Awareness of these patterns doesn't make us immune to them, but it does create opportunities for reflection. When making important decisions, we can pause and ask, what biases might be influencing my thinking here? This gentle self-inquiry, practiced over time, helps us think more clearly while maintaining compassion for the very human ways our minds work. As we transition to our next chapter, we'll explore how these biases interact with the broader process of decision-making, how we choose among alternatives, and navigate uncertainty. Chapter 5. Decision-making. The decision-making landscape. Every day, we make thousands of decisions, most small and automatic, some consequential and deliberate. Understanding how we navigate choices helps us make better decisions and recognize why we sometimes struggle. Psychologists identified two broad systems of thinking, popularized by Daniel Kahneman as System 1 and System 2. System 1 operates quickly, automatically, and intuitively. It's what tells you instantly that 2 plus 2 is 4, or that someone sounds angry. System 2 is slower, more deliberate, and effortful. It's what you engage when solving a complex math problem or evaluating a major purchase. Most decisions blend both systems. You might use System 1 to quickly narrow options, then engage System 2 for final evaluation. The interplay creates efficiency, but also vulnerability to the biases we discussed earlier, which often operate through System 1's rapid, intuitive processing. Satisficing versus maximizing. When making decisions, people generally adopt one of two approaches. Maximizers search extensively for the optimal choice, comparing many alternatives and seeking the absolute best option. Satisficers establish acceptable criteria and choose the first option that meets them. Consider buying a new laptop. A maximizer reads dozens of reviews, compares specifications across many models, agonizes over minor differences, and worries they might miss a better option. A satisficer identifies key requirements: price range, processing power, weight, finds a laptop meeting those criteria, and purchases it without extensive additional searching. Research suggests satisficers often end up happier with their choices, despite sometimes selecting objectively inferior options. The maximizer's extensive search creates higher expectations and more opportunities for regret. There's always potentially a slightly better option they didn't find. The satisficer feels content because their choice clearly meets their established criteria. Decision paralysis and choice overload. Paradoxically, having too many options can impair decision-making. The famous jam study by Sheena Iyengar demonstrated this. Customers encountering a display of 24 jam varieties were less likely to purchase than those encountering only 6 varieties. Extensive choice feels overwhelming, increases the difficulty of comparison, and heightens the potential for regret. This extends beyond consumer choices. Someone facing too many career paths might struggle to commit to any. A student overwhelmed by possible research topics might delay choosing. The abundance of options, which seems like pure advantage, actually creates psychological costs: increased cognitive load, decision fatigue, and anxiety about making the wrong choice. Understanding the basics of decision-making helps, but we also need to examine the emotional and social factors that profoundly influence our choices. Emotions and social influences in decisions. Traditional economics assumed humans make decisions through pure rational calculation, weighing costs and benefits objectively. Neuroscience and psychology have thoroughly debunked this myth. Emotions aren't obstacles to good decisions. They're integral to the decision-making process itself. Antonio Damasio's research on patients with damage to emotion-processing brain regions revealed something striking. These patients struggled with even simple decisions. Without emotional input, they could analyze options endlessly but couldn't actually choose. Emotions provide value signals, quick assessments of "this feels good" or "this feels wrong," that guide decision-making efficiently. However, strong emotions can also distort decisions. Anger increases risk-taking. Fear promotes excessive caution. Sadness makes us more willing to accept unfavorable trades. Recognizing current emotional states helps us ask, is this decision being unduly influenced by how I feel right now? The affect heuristic. We often judge risks and benefits based on how we feel about something rather than objective analysis. The affect heuristic. If something feels good, we tend to judge risks as low and benefits as high. If something feels bad, we judge risks as high and benefits as low. Consider two technologies: nuclear power and solar power. People who feel positively about nuclear power tend to judge its risks as low and benefits as high. Those who feel negatively judge risks as high and benefits as low. The same pattern appears with solar power. Objectively, risks and benefits should be assessed independently, but effect causes them to correlate in our judgments. Understanding this doesn't eliminate the pattern, but it suggests useful questions. Am I evaluating this based on objective information or primarily on how it makes me feel? What might I be overlooking because of my initial emotional response? Social proof and conformity. So, humans are profoundly social, and others' choices heavily influence our own, sometimes helpfully, sometimes not. Social proof, the tendency to assume that if many people are doing something, it must be correct, guides countless decisions. Solomon Asch's famous conformity experiments demonstrated this powerfully. Participants asked to judge line lengths would conform to obviously incorrect group answers about 30% of the time. These weren't weak-willed people. They were experiencing genuine doubt created by social pressure. If everyone else sees it differently, maybe I'm wrong. In modern contexts, social proof appears in online reviews, popularity metrics, and trends. These can provide genuinely useful information. Many people liking a restaurant suggests it's probably decent. But social proof can also create cascades where early random success creates momentum independent of actual quality. Authority and expert influence. We appropriately defer to experts in complex domains where we lack knowledge. The challenge is distinguishing genuine expertise from mere authority markers. Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments showed people would administer apparently dangerous electric shocks when instructed by an authority figure in a lab coat. In everyday decisions, we must balance appropriate deference to expertise with critical thinking. A doctor's medical advice deserves weight. Their political opinions don't deserve special authority. Recognizing this distinction helps us benefit from genuine expertise without surrendering our decision-making entirely. So, with understanding of both internal psychological factors and external social influences, let's explore practical strategies for improving decision quality. Improving decision quality. For important recurring decisions, establishing frameworks reduces cognitive load and improves consistency. Jeff Bezos uses a regret minimization framework, imagining himself at age 80 looking back, asking which choice he'd least regret. This reframes short-term considerations within a longer temporal horizon. A couple struggling with whether to move for a job opportunity created a simple matrix, listing values, family proximity, career growth, cost of living, climate preferences, and scoring each option. The process didn't make the decision for them, but it clarified trade-offs and revealed which factors mattered most. Frameworks needn't be complex. Even simple rules help. For purchases over $500, I'll wait 48 hours before deciding. Or, when choosing between options, I'll imagine giving advice to a friend in this situation. These create mental space between impulse and action. Pre-commitment and Ulysses contracts. Odysseus, knowing he'd encounter the siren's irresistible song, had himself tied to his ship's mast with orders not to release him no matter how he begged. This pre-commitment strategy, sometimes called a Ulysses contract, removes decision-making from moments of greatest vulnerability. Modern applications include automatic retirement contributions, removing the monthly decision to save, commitment devices like giving a friend money they'll donate to a cause you dislike if you don't meet a goal, or scheduling important communications for when you're calm rather than sending in emotional moments. The strategy acknowledges that future you might make poor decisions, so present you creates constraints. This isn't weakness, it's wisdom about human psychology. Seeking disconfirming evidence. Our natural confirmation bias means we unconsciously seek evidence supporting our preferred choice. Deliberately seeking disconfirming evidence counteracts this tendency. Before a major decision, try actively arguing against your preferred option. If considering a job change, don't just list benefits of the new position. Genuinely consider what could go wrong, what you'd miss about your current role, whether the grass might not actually be greener. This doesn't mean talking yourself out of good decisions, but ensuring you've considered the full picture. Ray Dalio's believability-weighted decision-making involves seeking input from people with relevant experience who might disagree with you, then seriously considering their perspectives. The goal isn't consensus, but exposure to genuinely different viewpoints that might reveal blind spots. The value of sleep and time. Sleep facilitates a process called emotional regulation. Intense feelings about decisions often soften after sleep, allowing clearer thinking. Sleep on it isn't just folk wisdom, it's psychologically sound advice for non-urgent decisions. Similarly, simply allowing time before committing to major decisions often helps. Initial emotional reactions settle. New information emerges. Different perspectives become salient. For reversible decisions, speed matters less than for irreversible ones. A writer struggling with whether to accept a demanding project felt tremendous pressure to decide immediately. Her mentor suggested, unless they need an answer in 24 hours, take a week. Your clarity will improve. She took the time, and the decision that had felt agonizing became clear. Closing thoughts on decision-making. Good decision-making isn't about achieving perfect rationality, an impossible standard. It's about understanding how emotions, biases, and social influences shape our choices, then implementing systems that work with, rather than against, human psychology. Some decisions will still be difficult, some outcomes disappointing, but approaching decisions with awareness, frameworks, and patience significantly improves outcomes over time. Next, we'll explore memory and learning, how we encode, store, and retrieve information, and why we sometimes forget what we most want to remember. Chapter 6: Memory and Learning. The architecture of memory. Memory isn't a single system, but several interacting processes. Sensory memory holds information for just seconds, the brief persistence of a visual image or sound. Short-term or working memory maintains information actively in consciousness for seconds to minutes, like holding a phone number in mind while dialing. Long-term memory stores information for hours to a lifetime. The process of transferring information from short-term to long-term memory is called encoding. Not everything we experience gets encoded. Attention acts as a filter, determining what receives sufficient processing for potential long-term storage. This explains why you might struggle to remember where you put your keys, an action performed with minimal attention, but readily recall a surprising conversation, which captured full attention. Encoding, storage, and retrieval. Memory formation involves 3 stages. Encoding transforms sensory experience into a form the brain can process and store. Storage maintains that information over time, though memories can change and degrade. Retrieval accesses stored information when needed. Each stage can fail. Poor encoding means information never properly enters memory. Reading while distracted often leads to poor encoding, explaining why you might reread the same paragraph multiple times without retention. Storage failures occur when memories decay or interfere with one another. Retrieval failures happen when information exists in memory but can't be accessed. The tip of the tongue phenomenon, where you know something but can't quite recall it. Different types of long-term memory. Psychologists distinguish between explicit, declarative memory, conscious recollection of facts and events, and implicit, non-declarative memory, unconscious influences of past experience on current behavior. Explicit memory subdivides into episodic memory, personal experiences, like your high school graduation, and semantic memory, general knowledge, like knowing Paris is the capital of France. Implicit memory includes procedural memory, skills like riding a bicycle, priming effects, prior exposure influencing later responses, and classical conditioning. This distinction explains why someone with amnesia affecting explicit memory might still learn new motor skills, implicit memory intact, while being unable to remember the learning sessions themselves. The different memory systems operate through partially independent neural mechanisms. The constructive nature of memory. A common misconception views memory like a video recording: objective, permanent, accurate. Reality is far more interesting and complex. Memory is constructive and reconstructive. We don't record experiences exactly. We encode key elements and reconstruct the details when recalling. This creates fascinating phenomena. Elizabeth Loftus's research on eyewitness testimony demonstrated that subtle changes in question wording alter what people remember about events they witnessed. Asking, "How fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other?" versus "when they hit each other?" leads to different speed estimates and different memories about whether glass broke. Each time you recall a memory, you essentially recreate it, and that act of reconstruction can alter the memory itself. Details can be added, changed, or lost. Strong emotions, suggestions, or subsequent experiences can all modify memories without any conscious awareness of the changes. Understanding memory's architecture helps explain both its remarkable capacities and surprising limitations. Let's explore what strengthens encoding and retention, the practical science of learning effectively. Enhancing learning and retention. One of the most robust findings in learning science is the spacing effect. Distributing study or practice over time produces better long-term retention than massing it together, even when total study time is equal. Consider learning vocabulary for a new language. Studying 50 words for 2 hours in one session feels productive, but produces relatively weak long-term retention. Studying those same words for 20 minutes across 6 sessions, spaced over days or weeks, the same total time, produces dramatically stronger retention. Why? Spacing creates opportunities for forgetting and retrieval. Each time you return to the material, you must work slightly harder to retrieve it, and that retrieval effort strengthens the memory trace. Massed practice feels easier because information remains in short-term memory. But that ease is deceptive. It doesn't translate to durable learning. Retrieval practice. Actively retrieving information strengthens memory more than passive review. This is the testing effect. Taking practice tests improves retention more than additional studying, even when the practice tests provide no feedback. A student preparing for an exam might reread chapters and notes, which feels productive and comfortable. A more effective approach, though initially more difficult, involves closing the book and attempting to recall the material, writing out key concepts from memory, explaining ideas aloud without notes, or testing yourself with flashcards. The challenge of retrieval is precisely what makes it effective. When retrieval requires effort, you have to work to remember the neural pathways strengthening, making future retrieval easier. Easy retrieval, conversely, provides minimal strengthening. This explains why highlighting or rereading, though popular study strategies, produce surprisingly weak learning. Elaborative encoding. Deeply processing information, connecting it to existing knowledge, considering implications, generating examples, creates richer memory traces than shallow processing. The levels of processing framework distinguishes between shallow processing, noting visual or auditory features like font or sound, and deep processing, considering meaning and relationships. Deep processing produces better retention. For example, when learning about photosynthesis, shallow processing might involve memorizing the chemical equation. Deep processing involves asking, how does this relate to what I know about energy transformation? Why would plants evolve this mechanism? What would happen if this process stopped? These questions create multiple retrieval routes and richer understanding. A medical student named Lisa struggled with memorizing anatomy until she began creating stories connecting structures to their functions, drawing diagrams from memory, and teaching concepts to classmates. These active, elaborative strategies replaced passive rereading and dramatically improved her retention. Interleaving. Mixing different types of problems or topics during study, interleaving, often produces better learning than blocking, practicing one type extensively before moving to the next, despite feeling more difficult. In a classic study, students learning to solve different types of math problems either practiced, blocked, all type A problems, then all type B, then all type C, or interleaved, mixing problem types. The blocked practice felt more comfortable and produced better performance during practice. But on a later test, the interleaved group performed significantly better. Interleaving forces discrimination. You must identify which type of problem you're facing and select the appropriate approach. This discrimination practice strengthens learning in ways that blocked practice doesn't capture. The same principle applies beyond math. Mixing topics, skills, or examples during study generally enhances learning, even though it feels harder. These evidence-based strategies can dramatically improve learning, but we also need to understand what impairs memory and how to work around those limitations. Memory failures and optimization. Forgetting isn't just memory failure. It serves adaptive functions. If we remembered every trivial detail, relevant information would be buried in clutter. Forgetting helps by clearing outdated information and highlighting what's important through repeated exposure and retrieval. Still, we sometimes forget what we wish to remember. Several mechanisms contribute. Decay theory suggests memory traces fade with time if not used. Interference theory posits that other memories compete. Proactive interference occurs when old information impairs learning new information. Retroactive interference occurs when new learning impairs recall of old information. A common example, learning a new password can make you temporarily forget the old one. Retroactive interference. Or, years of writing a previous address makes you occasionally write it even after moving. Proactive interference. These aren't deficiencies, but natural consequences of how memory systems work. The forgetting curve. Hermann Ebbinghaus's 19th century research revealed the forgetting curve. Newly learned information is forgotten rapidly at first, with the forgetting rate slowing over time. Without reinforcement, we might lose 50–80% of new information within days. However, each successful retrieval slows the forgetting curve. The first review might be needed after 1 day, the next after 3 days, then a week, then a month. This expanding interval approach, spaced repetition, optimally balances efficiency and retention. Software like Anki implements this algorithmically, presenting flashcards at increasingly spaced intervals based on retrieval success. Prospective memory and implementation intentions. While most memory research focuses on retrospective memory, remembering the past, prospective memory, remembering to do something in the future creates unique challenges. We must both remember the intended action and remember it at the right time. Prospective memory failures are common. Forgetting to send an email, missing an appointment, not taking medication. These aren't usually failures of intention or importance. They're failures of prospective memory systems. Implementation intentions help. When X occurs, I will do Y. The specific cue, when I sit down at my desk tomorrow morning, creates a retrieval prompt for the intended action. I will email the report. External supports, calendar reminders, notes in relevant locations, automatic systems, also reduce dependence on purely internal prospective memory. Sleep and memory consolidation. Sleep plays crucial roles in memory. During sleep, the brain consolidates memories, strengthening important ones and clearing trivial information. Studies show that sleep between learning and testing improves retention more than an equal period awake. Different sleep stages contribute differently. Deep sleep appears particularly important for consolidating declarative memories. REM sleep may support procedural memory and emotional memory processing. Chronic sleep deprivation impairs both memory encoding, harder to learn new information, and consolidation, poorer retention of what you did learn. A college student burning midnight oil before exams might feel productive, but sleep deprivation undermines both learning and performance. Better approaches protect sleep, even if it means less total study time. The quality of learning per hour improves significantly when well rested. Working memory limitations. Working memory, the mental workspace for active thinking, has severe capacity limits. Most people can maintain about 4 chunks of information simultaneously. This limitation constrains learning and problem-solving. Chunking helps, grouping individual elements into meaningful units. A phone number as 10 individual digits overwhelms working memory. As 3 chunks, area code, prefix, line number, it becomes manageable. Expertise in any domain largely involves developing sophisticated chunks. A chess master sees meaningful patterns where a novice sees individual pieces. Understanding working memory limits suggests strategies. When tackling complex problems, externalize information. Write things down, create diagrams, use tools to reduce the information you must maintain purely mentally. This frees working memory for actual thinking rather than mere storage. Closing thoughts on memory and learning. Memory is neither a perfect recording device nor a hopelessly fallible system. It's an evolved, sophisticated set of processes optimized for human needs. Understanding how encoding, storage, and retrieval work enables us to learn more effectively and remember what matters. The strategies we've explored, spacing, retrieval practice, elaborative encoding, interleaving, aren't tricks, but applications of how memory naturally functions. By working with these natural processes rather than against them, we can become more effective learners throughout our lives. Next, we'll turn to social behavior, how we navigate the complex world of human relationships and interactions. Chapter 7. Social Behavior. The social brain. Humans are profoundly social creatures. Our brains dedicate enormous resources to navigating social worlds, recognizing faces, reading emotions, inferring intentions, predicting others' thoughts. This sophisticated social cognition evolved because our survival and reproduction depended on successful cooperation, competition, and relationship maintenance. Even brief social rejection activates brain regions involved in physical pain processing. Social connection activates reward circuits. These aren't metaphorical. Social experience literally uses the same neural machinery as basic survival needs, revealing how central social bonds are to human psychology. Theory of mind. One of our most remarkable cognitive abilities is theory of mind, understanding that others have minds with beliefs, desires, and intentions different from our own. This capacity emerges in childhood, typically around age 4 to 5, and becomes increasingly sophisticated through life. Theory of mind enables coordination, deception, empathy, and complex communication. When you say something ambiguous, I consider what you know and intend, not just the literal words. When we plan together, I model your preferences and likely responses. This constant mental modeling of others' minds happens largely automatically, though it requires significant cognitive resources. Deficits in theory of mind, as seen in some autism spectrum conditions, make social interaction significantly more challenging, not due to lack of interest in others, but difficulty automatically reading social cues and inferring mental states. First impressions and social judgment. We form impressions of new people remarkably quickly, sometimes within milliseconds of encountering a face. These rapid judgments involve assessments of trustworthiness, competence, warmth, and threat. While often inaccurate in specifics, they're difficult to override and shape subsequent interactions powerfully. The primacy effect means early information disproportionately influences overall impressions. If someone's first comment is insightful, subsequent mediocre comments are interpreted charitably. If someone's first comment seems foolish, later intelligence must overcome that initial framing. Understanding this doesn't eliminate the pattern, but encourages humility. Our confident impressions of others often rest on limited, potentially unrepresentative information. Consciously seeking additional data and remaining open to revising judgments helps counteract premature social conclusions. Empathy and perspective-taking. Empathy, feeling what others feel, involves multiple processes. Emotional contagion is primitive and automatic. A baby cries when other babies cry. You feel sad watching someone grieve. Perspective-taking is more sophisticated, cognitively simulating another's experience to understand their emotions and viewpoints. Both forms of empathy serve important functions, but can also mislead. Emotional contagion creates connection, but can be biased toward those similar to us. Perspective-taking requires cognitive effort and can fail when others' experiences differ substantially from our own. We tend to assume others think and feel more like us than they actually do. Effective empathy often requires both automatic emotional resonance and deliberate perspective-taking, plus willingness to acknowledge that we might not fully understand another's experience even with our best efforts. Our individual social perceptions occur within broader contexts of group dynamics and social influence. Let's explore how groups shape individual behavior and how we navigate social hierarchies and norms. Group dynamics and social influence. Social norms, unwritten rules governing behavior in groups, exert powerful influence, often without our awareness. We conform to norms because deviation risks social rejection, and because we use others' behavior as information about what's appropriate or correct. Norms govern everything from how closely we stand to strangers. Personal space norms vary across cultures, to how we dress, speak, and express emotions. Most conformity is functional. It would be exhausting to consciously decide every minor behavior. But conformity can also perpetuate harmful practices when "that's how it's always been done" goes unquestioned. A fascinating aspect of norms is pluralistic ignorance. Situations where everyone privately questions a norm but believes everyone else endorses it, so no one speaks up. This can sustain practices no one actually supports. College drinking cultures often exhibit this. Individual students may feel uncomfortable with heavy drinking, but assume everyone else is comfortable, so they conform to a norm that privately troubles most participants. Social facilitation and social loafing. The mere presence of others affects performance, but the direction depends on task type and skill level. Social facilitation describes improved performance on simple or well-learned tasks when others are present. The audience energizes you. Social inhibition describes impaired performance on complex or novel tasks in others' presence. Their presence creates anxiety that interferes with concentration. Social loafing occurs when individuals exert less effort in group tasks than they would individually. In group projects, some members contribute less than they would if solely responsible. This isn't always laziness. Diffused responsibility makes individual contribution feel less critical, and evaluation becomes harder when outputs combine. Understanding these patterns helps structure group work. Making individual contributions identifiable reduces loafing. For complex creative tasks, allowing initial individual work before group collaboration often produces better results than pure group brainstorming, where social dynamics can inhibit contribution. Leadership and influence. Leadership involves influence, but what makes someone influential? Traditional views emphasized personality traits, charisma, confidence, intelligence. Contemporary research reveals leadership as more situational and relational. Effective leaders often exhibit transformational qualities, inspiring shared vision, modeling desired behaviors, individualized consideration of group members, intellectual stimulation. But leadership also depends on followers' perceptions and group needs. Someone might lead effectively in one context, but struggle in another. Influence operates through multiple pathways. Authority provides one route. We comply with requests from legitimate authority figures. Expertise offers another. We defer to those with relevant knowledge. Liking creates influence. We're more persuadable by people we like. Reciprocity, feeling obligated to repay favors. Consistency, desire to align with prior commitments. And social proof, following what others do, all facilitate influence. Understanding these influence mechanisms helps both in recognizing when we're being influenced and in influencing others ethically toward mutually beneficial ends. De-individuation and anonymity. In certain group contexts, particularly large crowds or situations of anonymity, people sometimes exhibit de-individuation, reduced self-awareness, and decreased concern with social evaluation. This can lead to behaviors one wouldn't typically engage in, both positive, like dancing freely at a concert, and negative, like aggressive behavior in riots. Online environments often create de-individuation. Anonymity and physical distance reduce normal social accountability, sometimes resulting in online disinhibition. People write things online they'd never say face-to-face. This isn't always harmful. It can facilitate authentic self-disclosure, but it also enables cyberbullying and other antisocial behaviors. Awareness of de-individuation helps us maintain ethical behavior even in anonymous contexts, by consciously reinforcing personal standards rather than relying solely on external social pressure. Beyond group dynamics, we navigate countless one-on-one relationships, each with its own patterns of communication, conflict, and connection. Let's explore the psychology of interpersonal relationships. Relationships and communication. Our earliest relationships create templates, working models that influence how we approach relationships throughout life. Attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, identifies patterns emerging from infant-caregiver interactions. Secure attachment develops when caregivers respond consistently and sensitively to an infant's needs. This creates expectations that others are trustworthy and that one deserves care. Anxious attachment emerges from inconsistent caregiving, leading to heightened relationship anxiety and fear of abandonment. Avoidant attachment develops from dismissive or rejecting caregiving, creating discomfort with intimacy and excessive self-reliance. These patterns aren't destiny. People can develop more secure attachment through positive relationships and therapeutic work, but they do influence relationship tendencies. Someone with anxious attachment might interpret a partner's busy day as rejection. Someone with avoidant attachment might withdraw when a relationship becomes intimate. Understanding attachment patterns in yourself and others creates compassion and insight into relationship dynamics that might otherwise seem puzzling or purely personal. Communication and active listening. Effective communication involves far more than clear speaking. Active listening, fully attending to what someone says without planning your response, forms the foundation of mutual understanding. Common listening barriers include defensive listening, hearing criticism even when none is intended; selective listening, only hearing parts that interest you or confirm your views; and pseudo-listening, appearing attentive while actually distracted. Active listening involves several practices: maintaining appropriate eye contact and body language, paraphrasing to ensure understanding, "So what I'm hearing is," asking clarifying questions, and acknowledging emotions. That sounds really frustrating. A couple experiencing communication difficulties began practicing a simple technique. One person speaks, while the other listens without interrupting. Then the listener summarizes what they heard before responding. This simple shift, ensuring each person felt fully heard before replying, dramatically reduced their conflicts. Many arguments stemmed not from genuine disagreement, but from feeling unheard and defensive. Conflict and resolution. Conflict in relationships is inevitable and not inherently unhealthy. What matters is how conflict is handled. The Gottman Institute's research on couple relationships identified 4 horsemen that predict relationship failure: criticism, attacking character rather than addressing specific behavior; contempt, treating the other with disrespect or disgust; defensiveness, denying responsibility; and stonewalling, withdrawing from interaction. Healthy conflict involves focusing on specific behaviors rather than character attacks, expressing feelings with "I" statements rather than accusations, taking responsibility for your contributions, and remaining engaged even when uncomfortable. Effective apologies contain several elements: acknowledging the specific action that caused harm, expressing genuine remorse, taking responsibility without excuse-making, and committing to different behavior. Many apologies fail because they skip crucial elements, especially responsibility. "I'm sorry you feel that way" acknowledges no responsibility. Gratitude and positive communication. While managing conflict matters, sustaining positive interactions matters more. Research shows healthy relationships maintain a ratio of approximately 5 positive interactions for every negative one. This doesn't mean fake positivity, but genuine appreciation, affection, humor, and interest. Expressing gratitude specifically and frequently strengthens relationships. Instead of generic thanks, specific acknowledgement. "I really appreciated you handling dinner when I was overwhelmed. It made such a difference," creates stronger connection. A teacher struggling with classroom management began deliberately noticing and acknowledging specific positive student behaviors, rather than only addressing problems. The classroom atmosphere shifted remarkably. Students sought positive attention through helpful behaviors rather than disruption. The same principle applies in all relationships. What you attend to and acknowledge tends to increase. Closing thoughts on social behavior. We are fundamentally social beings, shaped by our relationships and deeply affected by social dynamics. Understanding the psychological processes underlying social perception, group behavior, and interpersonal relationships doesn't eliminate the challenges of human interaction. Relationships require ongoing attention and effort, but it does provide frameworks for understanding why we and others behave as we do, creating opportunities for more intentional, compassionate, and effective social engagement. Our final chapter explores emotional regulation, how we navigate the internal landscape of feelings that color every aspect of our lives. Chapter 8. Emotional Regulation. The nature and function of emotions. Emotions are complex responses involving physiological changes, subjective feelings, cognitive appraisals, and behavioral tendencies. They're not irrational disruptions to clear thinking. They're sophisticated information processing and action preparation systems shaped by evolution. Fear, for example, isn't just an unpleasant feeling. It involves physiological arousal, increased heart rate, heightened alertness, cognitive focus, attention to threats, subjective experience, the feeling of fear, and action tendency, fight, flight, or freeze. This coordinated response helped our ancestors survive by quickly mobilizing resources when facing danger. Different emotions prepare different responses. Anger mobilizes for confrontation. Disgust protects from contamination. Sadness signals loss and can elicit social support. Joy encourages approach and relationship building. Each emotion, in appropriate contexts, serves adaptive functions. The complexity of emotional experience. While we use simple labels, happy, sad, angry, afraid, actual emotional experience is far more nuanced. Psychologists identify dozens of distinct emotions, and many emotional experiences blend multiple feelings simultaneously. You might feel proud and anxious about a presentation, or love someone while feeling frustrated with them. The concept of emotional granularity refers to the precision with which we differentiate emotional states. Higher emotional granularity, distinguishing between feeling irritated, frustrated, bitter, or furious rather than just bad, associates with better emotional regulation and well-being. Precise labeling helps identify appropriate responses and communicates more clearly to others. Emotions and cognition. The relationship between emotion and cognition is bidirectional. Emotions influence thinking. Anxiety narrows attention to potential threats. Positive mood broadens thinking and enhances creativity. Thoughts also influence emotions. Interpreting an event as unfair triggers anger. Interpreting it as your own failure triggers shame. This bidirectional relationship creates both challenges and opportunities. Emotions can bias thinking in unhelpful ways. Anxiety might make neutral situations seem threatening. But cognitive approaches can also modify emotional responses. Reframing a stressful presentation as an exciting opportunity can shift anxiety toward energized anticipation. Cultural and individual differences. While basic emotions appear universal, people across cultures recognize facial expressions of happiness, sadness, anger, fear, disgust, and surprise. How emotions are experienced, expressed, and regulated varies substantially across cultures and individuals. Some cultures encourage emotional expression. Others value emotional restraint. Some emphasize individual emotional authenticity. Others prioritize group harmony, even if it requires suppressing personal feelings. Neither approach is inherently superior. They reflect different values and social structures. Individual differences also matter. Temperament, biologically based emotional reactivity patterns, varies from birth. Some infants startle easily and take longer to calm. Others remain calm in new situations. These early tendencies influence but don't determine adult emotional patterns. Life experiences, learned strategies, and conscious effort all shape how we experience and regulate emotions. Understanding what emotions are and why we have them provides foundation. Now let's explore the practical challenge. How do we manage emotional experiences, especially difficult ones, in healthy and effective ways? Strategies for emotional regulation. Emotional regulation doesn't mean suppressing or eliminating emotions. It involves influencing which emotions we experience, when we experience them, how intensely, and how we express them. Healthy regulation allows us to experience emotions fully while choosing skillful responses rather than being controlled by momentary feeling states. James Gross's process model identifies several points where regulation can occur. We can select situations, avoiding or seeking certain contexts, modify situations, changing aspects of our environment, deploy attention, choosing what to focus on, reappraise meaning, changing how we interpret events, and modulate responses, altering physical, behavioral, or expressive aspects of emotions. Different regulation strategies work better in different contexts. No single approach serves all situations. Flexibility in regulation strategies is itself a valuable skill. Situation selection and modification. The earliest intervention point involves choosing or altering situations. If social anxiety troubles you, you might initially avoid large parties, situation selection, or arrive early to smaller gatherings where you can connect before crowds develop, situation modification. A student who becomes intensely frustrated studying in noisy environments might choose libraries over coffee shops. Someone prone to impulse purchases might avoid wandering through stores when bored. These aren't avoidance in a problematic sense. They're intelligent use of environmental structure to support well-being. Situation modification involves changing elements of contexts you're in. If a particular colleague's communication style triggers frustration, you might suggest written communication instead of phone calls, or schedule interactions when you're fresh rather than depleted. Small environmental adjustments can substantially affect emotional experience. Attentional deployment. Where we direct attention powerfully influences emotional experience. Distraction, intentionally shifting attention away from emotion-eliciting stimuli, provides temporary relief from difficult emotions. When grieving, watching a comedy offers respite. When anxious before a presentation, focusing on preparatory tasks rather than imagined disasters helps. However, chronic distraction from difficult emotions can be problematic. Emotions often contain important information that requires attention. The key is discernment. Sometimes emotions need space and attention. Sometimes we need temporary relief through distraction. Concentration practices like meditation train attention in ways that support emotion regulation. Rather than being pulled by every emotional fluctuation, you develop capacity to observe emotions with some distance, experiencing them without being completely identified with them. Cognitive reappraisal. Reappraisal involves changing how we think about a situation to alter its emotional impact. This doesn't mean denying reality or forced positive thinking, but rather considering alternative interpretations that might be equally valid. If someone doesn't respond to your message, you might initially interpret it as rejection or rudeness, triggering hurt or anger. Reappraisal considers alternatives. Maybe they're busy, maybe they didn't see it, maybe they're dealing with their own challenges. This doesn't mean the initial interpretation is wrong. It might be accurate, but considering alternatives prevents premature emotional conclusions. A musician struggling with performance anxiety worked with a therapist on reappraisal. Instead of interpreting physical arousal, racing heart, quick breathing, as threatening signs of panic, she learned to reframe them as energizing preparation, her body getting ready to perform. The physical sensations didn't change, but their meaning shifted, reducing anxiety and improving performance. Expressive suppression and its costs. Response modulation involves managing behavioral expressions of emotion. Expressive suppression, inhibiting outward signs while still feeling the emotion, is commonly used but often unhelpful. It requires effort, creates physiological stress, impairs memory and relationship quality, and doesn't actually reduce the felt emotion. Studies show that when one person in a conversation suppresses emotions, even their conversation partner experiences increased stress. There's physiological contagion of the suppression effort. The suppressor appears less warm and engaged, degrading interaction quality. This doesn't mean all emotional expression is appropriate in all contexts. Professional settings often require some regulation. But chronic suppression as a primary strategy generally backfires. Better approaches involve earlier intervention, situation selection, reappraisal, or accepting and experiencing emotions rather than fighting them. Acceptance and mindfulness. Sometimes the most effective regulation involves not trying to change the emotion, but accepting it. Acceptance-based approaches recognize that some emotional pain is inevitable, and struggling against it often intensifies and prolongs suffering. Imagine you're sad about a loss. Fighting the sadness, "I shouldn't feel this way, I need to get over this," often creates additional distress. Now you're sad about being sad. Accepting that sadness is a natural response to loss, allowing it space without judgment, often allows it to move through more naturally. Mindfulness practices cultivate this accepting awareness, observing thoughts and emotions without immediately reacting or trying to change them. Over time, this creates psychological flexibility. You can experience difficult emotions without being overwhelmed or driven to impulsive reactions. Having explored various regulation strategies, let's examine how to build sustainable emotional well-being and resilience, not as a state of constant happiness, but as capacity to navigate life's emotional complexity with skill and grace. Building emotional resilience. Resilience isn't the absence of difficulty or distress. It's the capacity to adapt and recover from challenges. Resilient people experience emotional pain, setbacks, and stress, but they possess resources and strategies that help them navigate these experiences without being permanently overwhelmed. Some resilience factors are constitutional or developed early in life, but resilience isn't fixed. Research consistently shows that resilience can be built through practice, experience, and intentional development of specific capacities. Social support and connection. Perhaps the most powerful resilience factor is strong social connections. Having people you can turn to for practical help, emotional support, and honest feedback buffers against stress and accelerates recovery from adversity. This doesn't require vast social networks. A few close, authentic relationships often matter more than many superficial connections. The key elements are trust, reciprocity, and genuine care. Relationships where you can be vulnerable without fear of judgment, where help flows both directions over time. Importantly, social support must be actively maintained, not just accessed in crisis. Regular connection during good times creates the foundation that sustains relationships through difficulties. A person who only reaches out when needing help may find support limited when crisis arrives. See self-compassion. Kristen Neff's research on self-compassion reveals it as a powerful alternative to harsh self-criticism. Self-compassion involves three components: treating yourself with kindness rather than judgment when you fail or suffer, recognizing that imperfection and struggle are part of the shared human experience rather than signs of personal inadequacy, and holding difficult emotions in balanced awareness rather than over-identifying with them. Many people fear self-compassion will lead to complacency or excuse-making. Research shows the opposite. Self-compassionate people are more likely to take responsibility for mistakes, more motivated to improve, and more persistent after failure precisely because they don't need to protect fragile self-esteem through denial or blame. A graduate student paralyzed by perfectionism began practicing self-compassion when facing setbacks. Instead of cascading self-criticism, "I'm so stupid, I'll never succeed," she practiced responding as she would to a struggling friend. "This is really hard, and you're doing your best. What do you need right now?" Her productivity and well-being both improved as the energy previously spent in self-attack became available for actual problem-solving. Meaning and purpose. Viktor Frankl's experiences in concentration camps led him to conclude that humans can endure tremendous suffering if they perceive it as meaningful. While most of us don't face such extreme circumstances, the principle applies. Connecting daily activities to larger purposes provides resilience. Meaning doesn't require grand life purposes. A parent finds meaning in supporting their children's development. A teacher finds meaning in helping students discover capabilities they didn't know they had. A craftsperson finds meaning in creating beautiful, well-made objects. The specifics matter less than the genuine sense that your efforts contribute to something beyond immediate self-interest. Research by Angela Duckworth on grit, sustained passion and perseverance toward long-term goals, reveals that purpose and interest fuel persistence through inevitable setbacks and difficulties. When challenges arise, as they always do, people with clear purpose have reasons to continue that transcend momentary discouragement. Growth mindset. Carol Dweck's research distinguishes between fixed mindset, believing abilities are innate and unchangeable, and growth mindset, believing abilities develop through effort and learning. These mindsets profoundly influence how people respond to challenges and failures. Fixed mindset sees failure as revealing fundamental inadequacy. "I failed because I'm not smart enough." This creates avoidance of challenges and defensive responses to feedback. Growth mindset sees failure as information and opportunity. "I failed because my approach wasn't effective. What can I learn?" This enables approach to challenges and productive use of feedback. Developing growth mindset doesn't mean believing anyone can achieve anything with enough effort. Natural aptitudes vary. It means recognizing that current performance doesn't define ultimate potential, that struggle and failure are necessary parts of learning, and that effort and strategy matter enormously in development. Physical foundations of emotional resilience. Psychological resilience rests on physical foundations. Sleep, nutrition, exercise, and stress management all substantially affect emotional regulation capacity. Someone chronically sleep-deprived, poorly nourished, and sedentary faces much greater emotional regulation challenges than someone attending to these basic needs. This isn't about perfection. Rigid rules about sleep, diet, or exercise can themselves become stressors. It's about recognizing that emotional and physical well-being are inseparable. When facing persistent emotional difficulties, examining sleep, nutrition, movement, and stress often reveals addressable contributors. A therapist working with a client struggling with anxiety and depression noticed minimal improvement despite good therapeutic work. Detailed assessment revealed the client was sleeping 4 to 5 hours nightly due to work pressure. Prioritizing sleep, difficult given work demands, created noticeable improvement in both anxiety and depression within weeks. The therapy became effective once the physical foundation was addressed. Emotion regulation in context. Effective emotion regulation always occurs within specific contexts and in service of goals. What constitutes healthy regulation varies. A surgeon in the operating room appropriately suppresses emotional responses to focus on technical precision. The same suppression in personal relationships would be problematic. The goal isn't constant calmness or happiness. These aren't realistic or even desirable. Some situations warrant anger. Some warrant sadness. Healthy regulation means experiencing emotions appropriate to situations, responding skillfully rather than impulsively, and recovering reasonably from difficult experiences rather than becoming stuck. A framework that can guide regulation decisions involves asking, is this emotion telling me something important? Is my response aligned with my values? Am I being skillful in this situation? These questions create space between emotional experience and behavioral response, space where choice and wisdom can operate. Closing thoughts on emotional regulation. Emotions are neither enemies to be conquered nor infallible guides to be followed without question. They're sources of information, motivation, and connection that require skillful engagement. Learning to work with, rather than against our emotional nature, experiencing feelings fully while maintaining capacity to respond thoughtfully, is perhaps one of the most valuable psychological capabilities we can develop. It doesn't eliminate life's difficulties, but it profoundly affects our capacity to navigate them with resilience, wisdom, and grace. Final reflection. We've journeyed through 8 domains of human psychology: attention, habits, motivation, and willpower, cognitive biases, decision-making, memory and learning, social behavior, and emotional regulation. These aren't isolated topics, but interconnected aspects of psychological life, each influencing and being influenced by the others. Attention shapes what enters memory, which influences future decisions. Habits automate behaviors, conserving willpower for novel challenges. Emotions color social perceptions and bias judgments. Cognitive biases affect how we interpret social situations and regulate emotions. The mind is an integrated system, not a collection of separate modules. The value of psychological understanding. Why study psychology? Not to achieve perfect rationality, flawless memory, or constant happiness. These are impossible standards that would lead only to frustration. We study psychology to develop realistic understanding of how minds work, including their remarkable capabilities and inherent limitations. This understanding creates several benefits. It reduces self-blame when we struggle with challenges that are actually universal human difficulties. It suggests strategies for working with rather than against psychological tendencies. It creates compassion for others' behaviors when we recognize the psychological processes underlying them. It enables more conscious, intentional living, rather than being purely driven by unconscious patterns. Patience with change. If this exploration has revealed aspects of your thinking or behavior you'd like to change, approach the process with patience and self-compassion. Psychological patterns, especially long-established ones, change gradually through consistent practice, not dramatic overnight transformation. Small changes compound over time. Slightly better attention management, marginally more effective habits, moderately improved emotional regulation. These accumulate into substantial life quality improvements. The goal isn't perfection, but gradual, sustainable progress. Expect setbacks. You'll intend to focus, but find yourself distracted. You'll commit to new habits, then miss days. You'll regulate emotions skillfully sometimes and react impulsively others. This isn't failure. It's the normal, non-linear process of change. What matters is returning to practice, learning from setbacks, and maintaining overall direction even when specific days or weeks fall short of ideals. The human condition. Psychology reveals both our universality and our individuality. We all share basic psychological architecture, attention limitations, habit formation mechanisms, cognitive biases, emotional systems. Yet we each experience these through unique temperaments, histories, cultures, and circumstances. This combination of universality and uniqueness has implications. The universality means you're not alone in your struggles. Others face similar challenges, even if specifics differ. The uniqueness means your path to well-being will be personal. Strategies that work beautifully for others might not suit you, and that's okay. Discernment about what works for you, rather than rigid adherence to any particular approach, serves you best. Looking forward. The psychological patterns we've explored will continue shaping your experience whether or not you attend to them consciously. The question isn't whether these processes operate, but how aware of them you'll be and how intentionally you'll engage with them. You might notice attention wandering during important tasks and gently redirect it. You might recognize a cognitive bias influencing a judgment and seek additional perspectives. You might catch yourself in habitual reactivity and choose a more skillful response. You might extend compassion to yourself during difficulty rather than adding self-criticism to existing pain. These small moments of awareness and choice accumulate into something larger, a way of being in the world that's more conscious, more intentional, more aligned with your deepest values. Not perfect, not without struggle, but progressively more skillful in navigating the complex, challenging, beautiful experience of being human. A note on integration. Knowledge alone doesn't transform. It's practice and lived experience that create change. As you move forward, consider not just understanding these concepts intellectually, but experimenting with them in your daily life. Notice your attention patterns. Observe your habits. Watch for biases in your thinking. Pay attention to what influences your decisions. Experiment with memory strategies. Notice social dynamics. Practice emotion regulation approaches. Psychology is ultimately a practical discipline. Its value lies not in abstract knowledge, but in enhanced capacity to live well, to think more clearly, learn more effectively, relate more skillfully, and navigate emotional life with greater resilience and wisdom. That was the end of the last chapter. Thank you for taking this journey through human psychology. The mind is endlessly fascinating, complex, powerful, flawed, and beautiful. Understanding it better doesn't solve all problems or eliminate all difficulties, but it provides tools and perspectives that can make meaningful differences in how we navigate our lives. The same psychological processes we've discussed will shape tomorrow, next week, next year. But now you have frameworks for understanding them, language for thinking about them, and strategies for working with them more skillfully. What you do with this knowledge is entirely up to you. May this understanding serve you well, not just in pursuing your own goals and well-being, but in extending understanding and compassion to others navigating their own psychological journeys. We're all working with the same basic human mind, trying to build meaningful lives within its possibilities and limitations. That shared condition is worthy of both respect and kindness. To wrap up, we've explored the fascinating ways our minds work, from focus and attention to habits, decision-making, memory, and social behavior. Understanding these concepts can help you make better choices, develop positive routines, and gain deeper insight into yourself and others. As you move forward, remember that real psychological strength often shows itself in quiet moments, in choosing patience, kindness, and integrity, even when no reward is guaranteed. Acting with awareness and compassion without expecting anything in return not only shapes the world around you, but gradually reshapes your own mind as well. Thank you for spending this time with me and for staying until the end of this journey into human psychology. If this video resonated with you, Feel free to leave a comment. You can simply write "awareness" to let me know you were here. And if you'd like more calm, in-depth explanations like this, consider subscribing. Until next time, stay curious, stay calm, and take care.